Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bleav in Bengal podcast. Solomon Wilcots, and of course, joined by our Bleav in Bengals insider, Charlie Goldsmith. And Charlie, look, Cincinnati Bengals, at least in the second half of the season, did what they were supposed to. They finish out with a 5-game win streak. And after starting the season 4-8, they end up with a 9-8 record. No, they don't get into the playoffs. Things didn't materialize. No, Denver didn't lose to Kansas City. And, of course, the Dolphins didn't lose to the Jets, so they needed Denver to lose in order to get in. I want you to at least speak to what happened to this team. How did they improve to the point where they had such a strong finish?
You saw enough progress defensively, and you saw enough, minor scheme changes and personnel changes to get to the point where the defense was able to beat the teams on their schedule. But as you saw today, when the Bengals then fired Luan Romo, what they ultimately decided was, the opponents they were facing, the quarterbacks they were facing, were kind of just as much of a part of their own demise as the Bengals defense, forcing some mistakes. And there definitely was some positive. Battle played better. Taylor Britt played better. Osai played better. Pratt had some moments. Hilton had an incredible finish to his season. But the Broncos, specifically Bo Nix, collapsed in overtime against the Bengals. Russell Wilson collapsed in the fourth quarter against the Bengals. And while there were some positives, it didn't outweigh or overshadow the fact that more often than not, when it really mattered and it was really high stakes this season against a quality opponent, this Bengals defense couldn't get it done.
This one for me is personal because I think the world of Bengals defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo, who was let go at the end of the season. It was announced at the time of our recording. It was announced on Monday. After 6 seasons, he will no longer be coaching and managing the Cincinnati Bengals defense. In the end, what happened? Why was this decision made, in your opinion? And what's next? How do they fill the void? How do they improve?
Lou's a good coach. The 2021 and 2022 defenses that he built was franchise changing and league influencing, but we all have strengths and weaknesses. And the Bengals can't put Lou in a position to be with those types of defenses. And what they need is someone who has a different set of strengths. And to get a bit more specific with that, kind of the enemy of Luan Romo from his scheme and his system, it's young defensive backs. He always talks about the time it takes for them to grow and the experience needed to develop the communication and the chemistry and the timing and the anticipation and all of these things that, Cheeto Awuzie, Mike Hilton, Von Bell when he was in his prime, Jesse Bates had down. That's not the defense the Bengals, those aren't the guys the Bengals are going to be having in their secondary going forward. What they need is a guy who can get a 4th-round pick in his first year, or 2nd-round pick in his second year, out there against an offense with an elite receiver and not die. Like, I call it like a gum and toothpicks defense. Like, they need someone who can build more with less. And that what Anarumo's strength was making the most of a lot. They need a guy who can build more with less. Again, that wasn't Lou's strength. They also need someone who's going to kind of help bridge some flaws in the front office as they bring in players in for the defense. Again, not the skills that Anarumo is showing were his strengths.
Wow. I just know there was a time when the marriage worked perfectly. And then, for whatever reason, the marriage didn't. It's not lost on me. Please help me. I'm trying to ask you questions that I know people, if they're watching us right now, they're screaming at their television set some of these questions, because these are the questions I hear in the local bars and the local taverns and when I'm golfing on the golf course. They're saying, well, why was he so good before and why is it not working out now? Why did we not keep his best players that he wanted to keep, like a DJ Reed or like a Jesse Bates? When you let his best players like Chidobe Awuzie go, then that's when things begin to deteriorate. That good coaches also need good players. To that, you say what?
Yeah, I mean, this is a black stain on the front office. I would say as much as anyone. The fact that they weren't able to continue to give Lou the resources from a personnel standpoint that he needed to build the defense that, he was best suited to run. And Lou Anarumo, for the rest of his life, is going to be able to say to anyone he sees, man, if we just kept Jesse Bates, this would have gone a lot differently. And he's right. He is 1,000% right. It's a sunk cost with Bates. It wasn't working with the young guys they were bringing in to replace him. I think that they need a coach who can help them bring in better players from an evaluation perspective. Someone who's going to do better than finding, Zach Carter and DJ Turner and Miles Murphy in the draft. Part of that's a small part of that was on Lou. A much bigger part of that was on the front office, but a different voice maybe can help them improve their hit rate. Again, Lou shined with the personnel, with the specific defense. He was, that he really excels at running, but the Bengals, because of mistakes the front office made, because of Lou's inability to make the most of kind of what the front office was giving him. Well, the front office isn't changing. Something's got to change. It's a black stain on the front office again that they've fired Lou, but it's the situation and the reality they live in. And now they need someone who can help them make the most of where they're at.
Look, I hear it from both sides. I talk with a lot of coaches in this league that said if they were coaching with the Bengals, they would want to be involved in scouting. They would want to be involved in picking their players. Mike Brown is the son of a coach, the great Paul Brown, who believed that he wanted to have a coaching staff that was invested in the players who are brought in. There's so many other organizations that the way the league is ran today, they do it differently than the Bengals. And I'm not saying the Bengals are wrong. Again, if I was a coach coaching for this team, I would absolutely love it because Mike Brown would allow me to have some say-so in the players that I pick. But while I'm trying to win games, other teams are out scouting players. They are ahead of me in the scouting curve, in the scouting process. And then as soon as the season's over, now I'm working my tail off to become a scout or to do the things that scouts do. I'm chasing it. I'm trying to figure out who the best defensive backs are. I'm trying to figure out who the best linebackers are. Well, their scouting departments on the other teams already out there. They're not that the Bengals scouting department isn't, but it's smaller than those other teams because the Bengals say that their coaches are part of that process. Well, you and I both know while you're trying to win games, you can't be out scouting. So I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that, where the Bengals are compared to most teams, because I do think there are times when they outperform the median average, where they are much better than their competition. And then there are other times where they underperform. To that, you say what?
I think this part's equally on the front office and on, the coaching staff that was having a role in bringing in these players as well. I think there was a disconnect between what the Bengals saw from defensive players they were drafting and then the roles they ended up having those players fill. The classic example, Dax Hill, they thought was a safety. He's a corner. Miles Murphy and Joseph Osai, they used as run stoppers for a lot of the early parts of their careers. Zach Carter, they brought in to rush the passer. Then they had him playing nose and way out of position there. Like, there's so many different examples. Basically, everyone except for Cam Taylor-Britt, who himself has had ups and downs, wasn't, they thought DJ Turner was going to be this man corner, and that just wasn't the traits that ended up being to his strong suits. There were all these guys that they brought in who they thought, all right, this is the vision of how they fit. And then there was a disconnect in, well, what did that really look like from a schematic standpoint on the field? And when you have 10 examples like that, something's not working with your process of evaluation and linking that to scheme. And I don't think Anarumo's role in that process was a strength of his. I think he had other incredible strengths, which is why the defense was as good as it was in 21 and 22. But when you're paying your quarterback, you're preparing to pay your receiver or receivers, you just need to fix that process or else your defense isn't going to stand a chance. And the biggest strength of the next guy they bring in has to be what he can do in the process of making sure you know exactly what you're getting through the draft.
The only offensive coach that was let go in this subsequent change that we see the Bengals undertaking was Frank Pollock. That to me was surprising because he was the only offensive coach that was let go. He was a guy that left us, and then they had to, there was this thing that we had to have him back, and that he was a much better coach than you could get, and we were fortunate to have him. Why is Frank Pollock no longer coaching the offensive line for the Cincinnati Bengals?
Yeah, look at the results again. Cordell Volson last year, last December, I was talking to a lot of people. There was a lot of anticipation that the Bengals would be talking about extending him at this point next year. And Cordell Volson, after the season he just had, will be on the roster bubble at this time next season. Alex Kappa just fell off this season. Look at Amarius Mims, who was so great for the first few months, But then the injury stuff, the confrontation with Frank Pollock on the sideline during the Cleveland game, you look at the depth, the fact that the 2021 draft class from an offensive line perspective, Carman, Hill, Smith gave you nothing. And you weren't, finding undrafted free agents or other late round picks that you identified and targeted and convinced the front office to go out and get. So there was just the cupboard was pretty bare from an offensive line perspective. That was backed up in the way that the unit really got worse as the season went along as well and was playing its worst football up front in December and January. So again, in a results-oriented business, that leads to tough decisions.
Yeah, the offensive line simply has to be better. I would argue that the talent that's on that offensive line is much better than the level that they performed at. I will say that. And they are, I think the world of many of those players, because I think a few of them, if you look at a Ted Karras, if you look at an Orlando Brown Jr., I think they're amongst the best at their position in the league. And I think Amarius Mims can be part of that conversation. But you and I both know it's part of growth and development. They've got to continue to get better. Talk to me about defensive line. Marion Hobby, he was also let go. James Betcher, the linebacker coach, was also let go. How much of this is a complete overhaul, and to what extent might we see now many of the players that they hand selected, you might see some changes being made there?
It'll be hard. I guess it'll be hard to see. I'll start with linebacker. It'll be hard to see sweeping changes at linebacker just because Wilson and Pratt are two of the only guys with experience in this scheme. And I think we can have a Jermaine Pratt cap candidate conversation, but I think it's too early for that. I don't think you're making a change there with that in mind.
Yeah.
On the defensive line, maybe we could see some more there. Hubbard has the potential to have a rework contractor to enter free agency because he's probably not suited for the role that the Bengals gave him that extension to fill in this defense with where he's at in his career. BJ Hill entering free agency. Sheldon Rankins will probably be cut.
Wow.
The rest of the defensive line is a bunch of young guys who Miles Murphy, Chris Jenkins, McKinley Jackson. If you can tell me what those guys are going to be, let me know. I think the jury couldn't be more out on those three players. So it's just a defensive line that's just in such transition. Hendrickson entering a contract year as well, he's 30 now as well. Such a defensive line in transition where you just haven't gotten what you've needed from that group in terms of the guys you've invested in and the guys you've drafted. So again, all that leads to coaching changes for most teams around the league.
All right, let's turn it more positive. We just saw one of the great, more historic seasons by a wide receiver in NFL history when Jamar Chase became the fifth player since the 1970 merger. That's when we only had like maybe 12 teams in the whole league, and they went from 12 to 24 overnight, just so people understand what the merger was. It was the AFL teams joining the NFL teams, and the league doubled overnight, right? So since it's doubled, only 5 players have led this league in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. Jamar Chase is one of them. How can you put that into perspective, what he's accomplished this season, considering he wasn't a happy camper when we kicked off the 2024 season, Charlie?
He just did everything. He prevented defenses from finding a way to take him away. The best example I can think of is the Broncos game where Jamar had like the quietest 90-something yard game I've ever seen. They put Surtain on Chase for almost the entire game. Chase won that matchup. They just kept throwing the ball to Higgins, but Chase was open in a lot of his matchups against Surtain. He ended up getting a lot of catches as well where he lined up out of the slot, where they forced a specific matchup with motion into a specific alignment, bunching off into a specific route, ways to get Chase the ball quickly. All that stuff was new to this season. And the Broncos game was kind of the shining example I saw of the Bengals finding ways to just know where Chase was going to be exactly. And then when defenses try to take that away by throwing a curveball like the Broncos did by, there was like one out of nowhere cover 3-ish rep that they ran right after Jermaine Pratt's pick. And Jamar read it, knew exactly how to get into the right window, get behind the backer, and it turned into like a 30-plus yard catch. Like, he was just doing everything at such a high level. No matter what you threw at him, he knew exactly what the answer was supposed to be, and he had a different way to beat you, whether it was man, whether it was a zone you weren't expecting. His motions, his route running, his feel, his finesse, all of that together led to a truly unstoppable player this season.
Last thing we got to talk about, Zack Taylor. I think he did a phenomenal job coaching this team. He had nothing to do with the contracts that were or were not given to players. I thought morale was at an all-time low coming into the season. I do think that impacted the start of the season. I do think he can do a better job getting the guys ready to play. But I think this year, the slow start, there was a lot to do with morale or the lack thereof as a result of contracts that weren't signed. But I thought he helped turn this team around. You scored 27 or more points for 8 straight games. When you have a talented as Joe Burrow is, you have a quarterback that's performing at the level he is. 10 games this year with 3 or more touchdown passes. He had 8 consecutive games where he had 3 touchdown passes. It's just phenomenal in terms of what he's been able to do. What can you say about Zack, where he's the guy that's coaching the offense? He's the play caller. He's helped groom. He's the guy that's moving Jamar Chase around this year when years before he did not move around, but they knew he had to do that this year. And we've seen this growth and development of Jamar as well as with Joe Burrow. In what way can we bring that back to Zack Taylor and who he is as a head coach and as a play caller?
Real quick, I want to get something off my chest based on something you said, mentioning the slow start. I think the Bengals were just a bad defense, and that's why they lost to the Patriots. In my opinion, it wasn't because of a training camp philosophy or preseason reps. It was because they couldn't tackle Ramondre Stevenson. And, oh, by the way, they couldn't tackle anybody this season. It wasn't a week 1 thing. They just couldn't tackle anybody. And then week 2 was one of their best, maybe the best defensive performance they had all season. Before then, it kind of got worse as the season went along until the last month of the season defensively. What is Joe Burrow loyal to? I think Joe Burrow's loyal to Zack. I think Zack has done a great job of building an environment where Joe feels confident that this is the best that I can play, and the team is capable of reaching the heights that Burrow expects. They didn't this year. Right. They failed the last 2 years in doing that, but Burrow believes in that. What's Burrow's belief in the front office and ownership? What are you loyal to within an organization? I don't know. I do know Burrow is loyal to Zack, and that goes such a long way when you look at the happiness and the maximizing of your star franchise player.
I asked Cincinnati Bengals to look at it this way. Let's just say you were coming out of law school or you were coming out of your respective college, university, or institution, and you got the dream job that you wanted your whole life. There's going to be someone within that company that's going to be part of your growth and your development. Yes, the company hired you, but there are a lot of other companies that would also hire you, right? But the person in the building who's helping you reach your full potential, we call them mentors, right? We call it, those are the guys that are the burning bush for many careers, whether you're an athlete or any other industry. Those are the people that really, truly matter. And I think those are the people that make companies go. Those are the people that help human beings reach their full potential. That's what Zack Taylor has done. That's what he's done for the Bengals, taking them to a Super Bowl in a short period of time since he became the head coach. That's what he's done for Joe Burrow. And you're right. Joe Burrow knows that this is the guy who gave me the keys, who gave me everything that I said I wanted. I often talk about putting Joe under center a whole lot more. Joe doesn't like operating under center. He wants to be in the shotgun. He wants to see it all. You know who knows that? Zack Taylor. And why he came from a system where all the quarterbacks worked under the center, not from shotgun. He's going to give Joe Burrow what he needs to be successful and what he's most comfortable doing. And you and I would want to work for someone like that, right? If you're saying you're going to build it around me, you're going to empower me.
And it works on offense.
Run this. And it absolutely works. And so I think I just really wanted our listeners and our viewers and Cincinnati Bengals fans to know who and what Zack is as a coach and the impact that he's making with the organization and with players. I thought last year going 9-8 with Browning as the quarterback and without Burrow, I think that was something. Let's face it, 2 straight years of not making the playoffs. We know that's not good enough, but just kind of what more can you add, at least in terms of what he's meant to 2 players who have had historic seasons for the Cincinnati Bengals in 2024?
Now, I'll add this. Kind of the next step for Zack is developing the next wave of leaders on the Bengals defense. I think Zack has nailed empowering Burrow the way exactly we were saying, building an operation where Orlando Brown and Ted Karras and Jamar Chase can be the leaders, the presences, the maximizing their abilities as players that we've seen. Kind of and Zack has spoken about this. The next step is equaling that on the defensive side of the ball. It's turning Logan Molson and Jermaine Pratt into, the equivalents on that side. It's guys like Cam Taylor-Britt. It's some Jordan Battle. It's guys like this, finding your equivalent kind of core foundational pieces and empowering them to kind of bring everyone along with them. That falls on the head coach in identifying those guys, putting them in those positions and starting that process. The offense shows that Taylor has the potential to do that. And this offseason is going to be huge for him, equaling that on the defensive side of the ball.
One last question before we let you go. Did we see T. Higgins in his very last game in a Cincinnati Bengals uniform?
You know what? I've always been a pro keep T. Higgins camp. Here's my final thought on this, and we'll talk about this for the next 10 months because this conversation is going to go. But you know what? Watching Joe, Jamar, and T every Sunday, for the next 5 years, if you do that, I'll be fine with, what I mean? We won't get to a Sunday in like 2026 and be like, man, it's a shame they paid T because this is getting old to watch. No, it's Jamar, it's Joe, it's T, it's the business they're in. And I wouldn't, there's no scenario where I'd criticize the decision of just staying in that business for the next 4 years and trying to make it work elsewhere. It'll certainly be fun to watch if they stick in that direction. And then, of course, like I keep saying, they're not getting a better player than T. Higgins, so I just keep the best player.
T. Higgins, 10 touchdown receptions this season. Just keep that in mind. Opposite of Jamar Chase, who's getting the ball almost on every single pass play. How does the other guy get 10 touchdown catches? That tells you that he commands enough attention to know that we have, I believe, the best wide receiver tandem in the entire National Football League. Charlie Goldsmith, we appreciate you joining us. Keep up the great work. We look forward to you joining us again next week, my friend.
Thank you.